Strong wind signal number 3 has been issued in Hong Kong. The city's retail sales tumbled in April. And Donald Trump becomes the first ever U.S. president to be convicted of a crime. Good evening and welcome to TVB News. The number 3 strong wind signal is in force. Weather authorities have named the tropical storm behind the weather condition in the city, Maliksi. Maliksi is currently around 300 kilometers southwest of Hong Kong. It is expected to gradually move north towards the western coast of Guangdong province at a speed of around 15 kilometers per hour. The observatory forecasts a strong wind signal number 3 will last until 6 a.m. tomorrow. Timothy Lee was at the harbourfront this afternoon to report on the weather conditions.
Victoria Harbour was clouded by dense fog throughout the afternoon. The weather condition in the city continued to worsen as the observatory issued the strong wind signal number 3 at 4:40 p.m. Some residents entered their water activities earlier after finding out about the updated weather warning signal. This woman said she got off the boat she boarded 40 minutes early because of the typhoon warning, adding that she almost fell off the vessel because it was rocking from the strong winds. But not all were hindered by the news of the poor weather.
Oh, not worried at all, really. I mean, where I'm from, it's wild weather is really a given, yeah, and it makes for a better adventure, I think. Back home we have a saying, it's just a bit of rain.
We are definitely aware. We've been checking the Hong Kong Observatory app, yes, but we also understand that the Observatory app is more conservative. I think just by existing, there are dangers. So, I mean, the weather, humans, we will do fine.
Yeah, well, we live in the Netherlands. All our lives we have to do with water.
Shortly after the strong wind signal number 3 came into force, residents could still be seen walking around quite normally around the Central Ferry piers. Despite the worsening weather conditions, many said they are not concerned about the upgraded typhoon signal.
The observatory said the rainstorms and strong winds caused by tropical storm Maliksi will gradually gain strength in Hong Kong as the tropical storm moves closer towards the Pearl River Delta. Li Shuk-ming, senior scientific officer of the observatory, noted tropical storm Maliksi will make landfall on the western coast of Guangdong province around midnight before moving further inland. She emphasized there is a low chance of weather authorities upgrading the tropical cyclone warning signal unless Maliksi increases in speed or edges closer to the city. Meanwhile, the amber rainstorm warning signal remained in effect for half an hour starting at 3 this afternoon. The observatory forecast the city will continue to experience rainfall in the next 2 days and stronger winds in the middle of next week. Timothy Lee, TVB News.
The government has announced retail sales in April tumbled by 14.7% compared with the same month in 2023, the biggest drop in nearly 4 years. Despite having the Easter and Qingming holidays in April, the retail sales in the city saw a notable drop of 14.7% from the previous year. After netting out the effect of price changes over the same period, the provisional estimate of the volume of total retail sales in April 2024 decreased by 16.5% compared with a year earlier. The government said many residents went away for the Easter holidays, affecting local consumption. The spokesperson said the unstable weather conditions in April were also a factor. Chief Secretary for Administration Eric Chan today said residents should now understand that national security risks exist in the city. Chan's comments came after a Hong Kong court convicted 14 of the 16 opposition figures in a high-profile subversion trial on Thursday. The Musangai reports.
The subversion trial involved 47 individuals with different backgrounds, including politicians, academics, and journalists. They were accused of using legislative power to paralyze the operation of the government and force the chief executive to resign by holding a primary election in 2020. 31 defendants pleaded guilty, while 16 pleaded not guilty. After 118 days of court proceedings, 14 of the 16 defendants who contested their subversion charges were found guilty by 3 national security judges on Thursday. two managed to clear their charges, but the Department of Justice decided to file an appeal against them. Speaking to the press today, Chief Secretary for Administration Eric Chan said the verdict shows that national security risks exist in Hong Kong. He stressed that the government will not tolerate individuals who conduct any behavior which undermines national security. Chan also criticized Western countries, such as the US, for wanting to stage a color revolution. He said young people must not be misled and tricked. News 9, TVB News.
Overseas, Donald Trump has become the first former U.S. president to be criminally convicted. The Manhattan jury found the 77-year-old guilty on all his 34 felony counts related to a 2016 hush money payment. Trump is due to be sentenced on July 11th, just days ahead of the Republican National Convention. NBC has the story.
Tonight, former President Donald Trump found guilty, convicted by a Manhattan jury of all charges. Now the first American president ever convicted of a crime. Jurors finding Mr. Trump guilty on all 34 counts of falsifying his business records to cover up a conspiracy to influence the 2016 election by hiding how he reimbursed his former fixer for paying off a porn star before the election. The Manhattan jury of 7 men and 5 women included 2 lawyers, 2 in finance, and the foreman in sales, and reached their decision after 2 days of deliberations, after hearing from more than 20 witnesses over 6 weeks. The prosecution's case largely came down to whether jurors would believe the word of Michael Cohen, Mr. Trump's former attorney and self-described fixer. Cohen was the only witness who directly tied Mr. Trump to the alleged crime of falsifying business records. He testified Mr. Trump directed him to pay off Stormy Daniels so she couldn't derail his campaign. She'd alleged a sexual encounter years before, but Mr. Trump vehemently denied it. Prosecutors argued at trial the former president was desperate to keep her silent, panicked after the release of the Access Hollywood tape, and then covered it all up, approving a scheme to disguise the $130,000 payoff with a phony paper trail through invoices, vouchers, and checks. Cohen's credibility in this case was key, the defense team branding the now disbarred lawyer who'd been convicted of lying under oath as the MVP of liars with an axe to grind against Mr. Trump, while prosecutors argued Mr. Trump chose Mr. Cohen for the same qualities that his attorneys now urge you to reject his testimony. Mr. Trump, who did not testify, reacting to the verdict tonight, attacking the case as politically motivated by a Democratic DA in deep blue Manhattan.
It's a rigged trial, a disgrace. They wouldn't give us a venue change. We were at 5% or 6% in this district, in this area. This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people, and they know.
Outside of court, boos and cheers. Late today, District Attorney Alvin Bragg reacting to the verdict.
We arrived at this trial and ultimately today at this verdict in the same manner as every other case that comes through the courtroom doors, by following the facts and the law.
And Americans have been reacting to the verdict. Donald Trump's detractors think it is further evidence that he should not be re-elected in the presidential election later this year. Trump supporters say he's done nothing wrong and is the victim of a politically motivated trial. David Garrett reports.
A decision in a New York courtroom that will have ramifications in Washington and across America. Outside of the court in Manhattan, this crowd celebrated as the guilty verdict filtered through. Pleased to hear justice served, these demonstrators don't want to see Trump back in the White House. Trump failed to convince a jury of his innocence in New York, but the former president says the real test will come in November when he goes up against Joe Biden again. These voters watch the day unfold in Michigan.
We are starting to hear that there are guilty.
What?
There are guilty verdicts.
What a joke.
Producer inside, we're hearing guilty on what they're.
Then it remains to be what guilty of what?
Now 13.
A travesty of justice. This is something that has shown to all of the American people out there how corrupt our government and our court systems have become, that you would go after a political opponent in the midst of a campaign.
It doesn't affect it in one way at all. Nothing. There's no thought process. We're voting for President Trump. That's it.
You know, I don't think this is a jailable offense, in my opinion. I mean, it's possible that they could send him to jail, but the next 3 trials, that's the important stuff. There are so many other horrible things he's done and lied about and put the country through, and it's divisive.
As Trump's motorcade drove away from the verdict, his campaign has to plan its next move as his legal team appeals. It is the story that has got America talking and asking, could the US vote in a president with a criminal record?
I have real reservations on voting for a convicted felon, but I don't believe he's a convicted felon. I believe it'll be overturned.
Well, I wouldn't have changed my vote voting in that direction, especially knowing that he's going to continue to remain on the ballot. I'm finding that that is shocking.
He's not fit for office, and this is just one of many things that he's up for conviction on, and so I hope this turns the tide and more people realize that he should not be allowed to be president again.
I don't agree with it at all. I think he should have been found not guilty. All the counts should have been dropped. I'm a huge Trump supporter, so I think he's done good with the country, and he's helped the Muslim community out a lot.
Trump still splitting American opinion even after a jury unanimously convicted him of a crime. David Garrett, TVB News.
And still ahead, the defense ministers of China and the U.S. meet in Singapore. The U.S. and Germany authorized Ukraine to use their weapons to attack inside Russia. And former policeman Zhang Ze is appointed as government's information coordinator. Welcome back. The 21st Shangri-La Dialogue, officially known as the Asia Security Summit, is being held in Singapore today. Defense Minister Dong Jun has met with his U.S. counterpart Lloyd Austin at the regional forum and exchanged opinions on some important issues. Dong and Austin held their first substantive face-to-face talks in 18 months on the sidelines of the conference. Dong urged the U.S. to uphold the One China principle and not interfere with China's domestic affairs. He also said China would not tolerate any Philippine provocations on the South China Sea. Both parties highlighted the significance of maintaining open lines of communication between the two militaries. They also exchanged opinions on other major issues, including the Israeli-Hamas conflict and the Ukrainian crisis. Beijing has announced it will suspend tariff concessions on over 100 import items from Taiwan under a trade deal in response to the island's trade restrictions. The mainland says Taiwan's ruling Democratic Progressive Party is responsible for the restrictions. The decision will take effect from June 15th. Danny Zhou has more.
Starting from mid-June, the mainland will halt tariff concessions on 134 Taiwan imports in response to the island's trade restrictions. These items have been enjoying preferential tariff rates after the Cross-Strait Economic Cooperation Framework Agreement, or ECFA, was signed in 2010. Lubricant base oils, machine tools and chemicals are included in the list. A mainland spokesman said the island had unilaterally adopted discriminatory measures such as prohibiting and restricting the export of over 2,500 mainland products. He said this is a blatant violation of the ECFA provisions on reducing or abolishing tariffs. Last December, the mainland suspended concessions on 12 chemical products after Taiwan failed to lift trade restrictions on mainland goods. Mainland officials criticized the move as putting the cross-strait company's interests and people's well-being in jeopardy, and that the DPP authorities should bear full responsibility for mainland's countermeasures. Danny Zhou, TVB News.
The German government has followed the U.S. to told Ukraine it can use weapons they have supplied on Russian targets across the border. In a change of policy, U.S. President Joe Biden has given Kyiv the green light to strike back with American weapons at Russian military assets. The eastern city of Kharkiv came under an attack last night as Ukraine's military struggles to repel Russian advances. Officials says at least 3 people were killed when 2 missiles struck about 30 minutes apart. NATO foreign ministers are meeting in the Czech Republic, including U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. The move by the US and Germany has angered the Kremlin. Earlier this week, Vladimir Putin warned of serious consequences for Ukraine's Western allies if they allowed their weapons to be used in Russia.
It's about defense, and therefore I'm not reacting to question where we are giving an impression that anybody is hitting on Russia. Nobody is hitting on Russia. Russia is hitting illegally against the international law on Ukraine. Ukraine is defending itself, and we are doing everything to help Ukraine that it can defend not only its country, but its citizens.
This is part of the efforts by President Putin in Moscow to prevent NATO allies from supporting Ukraine to defend themselves. And again, Ukraine has the right for self-defense. We have the right to help Ukraine uphold the right for self-defense, and that does not make NATO allies a party to the conflict.
Israeli War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz's centrist party has proposed a bill to dissolve Israel's parliament. The move follows an ultimatum Gantz issued in May, demanding Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu agree to a day-after plan for the Gaza war by June 8th. Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department said Israel's widening offensive in the southern Gaza city of Rafah has yet to amount to a major operation in the eyes of President Joe Biden's administration. Danny Rao tells us more.
Addressing questions about what actions in Israel's 3-week-old Rafah offensive would cross the red lines, the US State Department said that the Biden administration had earlier warned Israel regarding a full-fledged invasion of the city. A spokesperson said the White House doesn't yet consider it a major operation.
We've been clear about what this isn't, which is not a major military operation. Of course, at every measure, we have continued to stress the moral and strategic imperative to make sure that these military operations are conducted in a way that minimize civilian casualties.
Israel has deepened its incursion into Rafah, and intensifying violence in recent days has killed scores of Palestinians. It's unclear how many civilians are still in Rafah. At least 1 million people have fled since Israel launched its offensive into the city, which was crowded with 1.3 million Palestinians. The top United Nations court ordered Israel to halt its military offensive in Rafah last week as part of South Africa's case accusing Israel of committing a genocide against the Palestinians. Israel strongly denies the charges. Meanwhile, the United States says a proposed UN Security Council resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and a halt to Israel's military operations in Rafah fails to note a simple fact that Hamas is to blame for this conflict. Elsewhere, Stéphane Dujarric, the spokesman for the United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, provided humanitarian updates on Gaza. Dujarric said humanitarian workers face repeated denials of access.
Humanitarian workers face movement restrictions, including to border areas, and repeated denial of access and delays. This includes planned missions to collect supplies. We need Israeli authorities to swiftly facilitate access to the crossing so that aid workers can safely reach the crossing to pick up supplies.
Dujarric also said the Israeli military has a responsibility to facilitate aid operations within the Gaza Strip. Dan Oral, TVB News.
The government has announced John Tse Chen-chung has been appointed as the city's new information coordinator. Tse is currently the communications secretary in the chief executive's office. This is the first time in Hong Kong's history that the position is being filled by someone with a police background. Tse will start his new post on Saturday. Memo Seng-ai reports.
John Tse joined the police force in 1999. Most people got to know Tse during the 2019 anti-government protests when he held a police press conference on almost every weekday to explain issues related to the police and law enforcement actions. Tse became the district commander of Kwai Ting in the following year. In 2022, he was seconded to the Security Bureau and became a principal assistant secretary. In the same year, he joined the office of Chief Executive John Lee and took up the post of Communications Secretary. The government said he demonstrated outstanding performance. The role of an information coordinator is varied, including formulating news, public relations, and media strategies, maintaining communication with the media, and coordinating timetables for the introduction of major policies and programs. The post was established by the first chief executive, Dong Chi-hwa, but the position has remained vacant for 7 years. Veteran political commentator Lau Xiukai, now a consultant for the Chinese Association of Hong Kong and Macau, said the information coordinator will need to establish a good relationship between the government and the media if authorities want to do well in the future public opinion war. News 9, TVB News.
The Labor Department today published a revised code of practice for safety and health at work in confined spaces. The revised code has a 6-month grace period and will take effect on November 30th. There are multiple revisions to the Code of Practice. They include the enhancement of requirements for the supervision of contractors or proprietors on confined space work, adding a detailed template of the risk assessment form and stating the setting up of an air monitoring alarm. The Labor Department said the code has legal status. And that's the news. Thank you for watching.